Good morning, everyone. So, my name is David Getson, and thank you for taking a look at this video. And today, there was a nerve struck in a positive way about a video that there is the link established down there with several people on it. Brandon Van Dyke and John David Ebert, whom I always enjoy. I like listening to those guys separately, especially when they get discussions together. It's always very interesting. And they were talking with a guy, Michael Bavens, or Bauens. Depends on if it's a German pronunciation or not. They were talking about many things, but about how our culture is somewhat demanding a new way of education happening, how that impacts our culture. And that's been very relevant. It's been something that I have been focusing on. That there's Michelle was talking about how you have a gathering and a dispersing of energy. This is something this is a perennial theme in Spengler, that you have the Kultur. What he calls Kultur is the rising of a civilization. You have energy building, gathering, and then you have a dispersal of energy in what he calls Civilization, or kind of the imperial phase, where all the energy that was built up before goes out, and that's a whole other discussion there. But I think what's really interesting, this is something that my mind has touched on as well, is that there's a scale invariant nature to this, very much like a sound wave, that you have little moments. You have moments of Kultur and Civilization in someone's life. You could say that when someone has a midlife crisis, right, they're at it's all downhill from here. And that you've been gathering energy, and that you're at the peak of your career, and then you get worried, and you get divorced, and you buy an expensive car, and then you're retired. It still has that kind of rise and fall, and if you think about it as gathering of energy, dispersal of energy, it allows you to be very rigorous at how you analyze these rhythms, just like a sound wave, just like the movement of a stock market at different time frames, at different scales. And I think that this is very important, because we're at a point now where lots of people are very worried about what's happening to the world, to the United States. Understandably, there's something to be hopeful about. And by the way, this will be a little bit rambly, but this is just kind of a collection of my notes. I have more focused things on both my podcast and on other videos on this channel. But in a thread on Twitter. In a thread on Twitter, I noticed John David Ebert say he thinks that the cultural immune system of the United States is very strong. What he means by that is that when you have a lot of change, you have external influences, and a place that has a strong cultural immune system won't necessarily even need to fight it. They can welcome it. You know, Rome at its peak was saying, hey, look at all these fantastic cultures. Yes, I'm getting Greek sculpture. I'm experiencing some Egyptian mystery religion. Oh, isn't that all fantastic for us? Look at all the great things our culture owns, right? When it's a very strong thing. That's when you say things like diversity is our strength. That comes from an attitude, maybe not the fact, but at least the attitude or the aspiration to a strong cultural immune system. The weak cultural immune system is when maybe you're obsessed with that diversity of culture because you don't really have any beliefs yourself, either personally or in the culture, and that leads to a lot of directionless. It leads to a lot of people being depressed and sad. But he had remarked on Twitter, and this was very encouraging when this happened a couple of months ago. I noticed him say that he thinks that the United States immune system is very strong. So in that case, there is what he calls a boundary act, where they say, okay, hey, hold on, we're not going to let that happen anymore. We draw a boundary line there. I think that's true in the United States, and to add to that, I think that the United States is being very bivalent and patchy with its cultural immune system. There are parts of the United States that have a very strong immune system and parts that have an extremely weak cultural immune system, and part of the conflict that we're seeing, part of the civil unrest, part of the division that's again, that separation. We have a theme, almost, I don't want to say a separation into sheeps and goats, but it's a good metaphor. So And also, for the next thing I have noted, so John David Eder mentioned how Spengler was really off the radar in the 1980s. That this is something that no one, that's the whole guy who came up with this the idea to rigorously analyze the rise and fall of the civilization, among other things. That in the 1980s, when he came across this stuff, both Spengler and Heidegger, Heidegger the phenomenologist, Heidegger the guy who talked about being and time, that both of these things were not paid attention to. My suspicion on that is that there was a world with both of those guys, there was a certain kind of World War II connotation, fairly or unfairly. I think less fairly with Spengler, slightly more fairly with Heidegger, but there was a World War II connotation that made cautious and popular professors embarrassed or worried about studying them, and I think that's very much a part of these intellectual fashions, much to the detriment of what people would study. But along those lines, this was in 2012 when I started seriously coming across Spengler, 2011 and 2012. My own PhD advisor, I was in an architecture program that I never finished. I left after all the coursework for various reasons. But I found Spengler very relevant to my study in the historical development of architecture. I asked this so-called advisor if he thought it was worth including Spengler in my study in a serious way. The professor had no opinion one way or the other. So anyways, what I ended up doing I ended up going into architectural practice and then at the same time doing my podcast on history instead of doing the PhD thing. I think that was probably a better way to go, as frustrating as this current environment is for everybody. That's why I'm very interested and excited about all these new independent coursework things. So right now, I'm helping people design and permit new homes. So the idea of Spengler in that all art is born religious, and that how a culture understands the idea of number and the idea of prime symbol that comes out of that there's a kind of visual geometric metaphor, heuristic, a way of looking at things and making decisions. This is all very, very relevant to our lives. It's specifically relevant to architecture. I use it and think about it a lot when I was thinking about, for even something as supposedly mundane as what kind of angle I wanted the roof to sit at. This made a difference in those decisions. Michel Bavens was seeing. He was saying that he saw this shift between what I'm calling the potential and the kinetic. You can call it lots of things. I think Kultur and Zivilisation, yes, that's very good for Spengler, but you say that to somebody in English today, they have no idea what you mean, and you have to spend 10 minutes explaining it. I think potential, the era of potential energy and the era of kinetic energy, let's kick that around. That might be more readily understood to people, and it has the added benefit with Spengler. Kultur and Zivilisation only meant these broad stretches of like roughly 1,000-year cycles. The potential and kinetic energy, like I said, is scale invariant, and I think that's useful and important. So he sees, Mr. Bavens saw 2008 as a recent shift over into what you can call the kinetic. The shifting in academia generally from the win-win attitude into a win-lose attitude. I'd agree with that. There was kind of a decisive shift into a zero-sum game attitude, the idea of winners and losers, and that you would win. This is the dangerous part. I mean, sometimes that's the way things are, but the corrosive attitude is when people think that when someone else loses, they gain, and so they will want to push people out, they will want to tear people down. That ends up tearing everybody down to some degree, and that's how the institutions, that's like the verb of how the institutions fall apart, really, aside from the why. And then Mr. Brandon Van Dyke was extremely correct about the long-standing process of exclusion in the universities. The current political correctness is merely, he thought it lasted for like 20 years. The current political correctness is, I think, merely a very high-octane expression of this career-directed nepotism. It's a kinship of convenience, and sadly it cuts counter to meritocracy. And frustrating as that is, many people highly value meritocracy. And that is where the independent education comes to the fore, and opportunities for, well, it's getting past opportunities now, it's getting to a point of necessity, really, for disruptive innovation in the education space. I've been part of that in my own way for some years now. So as they had touched on that in this discussion at the time of the Gutenberg printing press, at the time of the printing press having what you could call market saturation, you can see that in the 15 and 1600s there was what a lot of historians have called the distinct, I think even people at the time, called the distinction between the new learning and the old learning. So the schoolmen, what Leibniz would call the schoolmen, the scholastics, the older Aristotelians, versus what was growing into the Age of Enlightenment. Churchill eloquently writes about in his histories is how that expressed in England, but it was all over the place in Europe. But there was a rather large disruption of the old institutions. I think what we're going through now is even bigger than what happened with the Gutenberg printing press. Back then, for example, in an institution like Oxford, continued, no problem. Cambridge, continued. Hired Isaac Newton, fantastic. Now there's a good chance that the institutions will have to rapidly adapt, and they're not doing it. Either that, or they're panicking in a certain sense. They're rapidly adapting into something that is maladaptive. I think that's where they are. So we'll see. And theater's very interesting. This thought just struck me as I was listening to them, that we're at a time now where it might be, we're definitely at a time where the civilization is fossilizing. We might be at a time where there's an upwelling of energy. I think there is an upwelling of energy that has been kept down. One of my favorite phrases from Spengler is that all art is born religious. Inspiration is actually the incoming of spirit, and if you're put by atheism and rationalism into the conscious, rational decision-making mind, like people like Dawkins and what's his name, Sam Harris, well, maybe there's a reason that Sam Harris works so effectively as an ASMR podcast. You know, it's like your rational mind. If your rational mind is overactive, listen to Sam Harris. But no, what was I talking? No, I shouldn't rag on Sam Harris too hard, the poor guy. But yeah, you have art is born religious. It comes out of a spiritual feeling. And theater and architecture are part of that. Whenever you have new momentum, it's in that. Both of these, interestingly, I have a background both in architecture and in theater, and they fit together. Theater is kind of architecture is the parental synthesis. They're both syntheses of the arts. Say, oh, theater is the synthesis of the arts. Architecture is the synthesis of the arts. Both are correct. The way they relate to each other is that theater is the child of architecture in a way. That obviously it's in a building, but architecture is a synthesis of all the arts that kind of gives birth to other things. It's the place where all this stuff happens. We're human. We live here. We live in buildings and stuff. So all the other stuff comes out of the context that is framed by that. And then the theater is as architecture is the parental synthesis, theater is the offspring synthesis, the child synthesis. And they play into each other. Parents and children influence each other, obviously, and architecture and theater influence each other. And it's not always just theater, right? It's not just like stage, but theater in the sense of artistic performativity, to risk sounding a little bit 80s Pomo, but it's artistic performativity. I think that's clear enough. So, and right now, we are having kind of this multimedia soup with online stuff. So we're seeing that in an interesting way, and right now, I think the child synthesis is educating and informing the parental synthesis. Although very interestingly, Christopher Alexander, the guy that I've been very honored to study with and I've studied from for a long time, his work, a lot of this digital stuff wouldn't exist without his work in architecture. Object-oriented programming, hyperlinks, all of that stuff was the digital people being inspired by the architecture. So you see this virtuous cycle. And that's why, ladies and gentlemen, I have been incredibly determined to do both teaching and building at the same time. However this ends up panning out. If you agree, like, share, and subscribe down below, and tell your friends and tell your enemies that you feel strong things about what I said, and tell me your opinions. I'll look forward to it. So, now it's time for the end of the video. It's been humid today, and because it's been humid, this is early morning pipe, again, in the Pipa di Napoli. You couldn't really see this in the previous video, but there you go. See, it's kind of lumpy on top because he recarved it, but it works. And nice thing about early morning pipe is it's an old Dunhill blend that the Irish rescued. It's now a Peterson blend. It's really sad that Dunhill is no longer English, but anyways. When humidity is around, it ends up not tasting like nothing. Unlike dish, which is great when it's not humid. But, I'm curious how many people actually care about this part of the video. We've been able to hear the birds here. If there are any old Roman augurs or perhaps a pontifex out there who can tell me what birds mean, I would appreciate your services. John Ebert's an astrologer, so I don't know, maybe he can try. These are green parrots. I may have mentioned it before. I probably have. Lovely green parrots. It's not hot here anymore, which is fantastic, so I think that's about enough. Thank you.